My name is Connie Shepard. I'm the CFO of Client Services at Enkel. And today, before we start our event, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded and ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. And we are very happy to share in this space together. I want to thank you. And for those of you who don't know Enkel, we are a finance and accounting partner for growing organizations. And we offer two types of services. We provide financial operation services as well as financial management services. So what is financial operations? That's really things that drive the engine. That's the engine that drives your organization. So that would be bookkeeping, AP, and most important, payroll. Yeah. For those of us who like to get paid. And then financial management is really to help you gain financial insights into your organization that will help support strategic decision making. So at Enkel, we provide both parts of those services. And you'll see that in this afternoon that we have our team members here at Enkel who's here to help you with any needs that you have. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of the Enkel team members. Okay, and with that, I'm going to pass it on to our Senior Director of Global Service Delivery, Kiran Dash, who's our moderator for this afternoon. Kiran?
Thank you so much, Penny. Thank you so much. Well, good afternoon and welcome to Enkel. And thank you for choosing us over the sunny afternoon outside in Vancouver. That wasn't the case yesterday. So thank you for coming in. Over the last 5 years of working with Enkel, and by virtue of that, having the opportunity to help and serve not-for-profits in some way, I've come to realize that there is a pattern we see when it comes to not-for-profits. There are words you hear like underfunded, overstretched, doing more with less. Initially, I thought it's a challenge. Over the years, I've come to realize it is starting to become a bit of an operating model rather than just a challenge. And the question is, even with that, nonprofit sector does so much good, incredible work. So it is still running and working. And if that is happening, then who really is carrying the cost? With 70 to 80% of workforce being women, probably the answer is not that random, but then let's discuss. With that, I would like to introduce our incredible panel here. We have Jenny. Jenny Conklin is the co-founder of Hope House Society, whom we proudly call our client, who are serving more than 900 residents across Vancouver and Victoria. Jenny has built many programs directly inside communities like downtown East Side. And when we say doing more with less, that's probably a day in Jenny's life. We also have Kyan. Kyan Yu is the assurance partner at M&P. She works very closely with not-for-profits, boards, and public sector organizations across BC. Kyan spends her time where numbers meet reality, what is truly sustainable versus what looks sustainable on paper. Thank you for joining us today, Kyan. And finally, we have Angela. Angela Robertson is the CEO of ASTIC and former CEO of Quorum. Angela brings a very interesting for-profit as well as not-for-profit perspective, which is important because Angela sees that when organizations are expected to grow and build without the mission discount that not-for-profits are expected to bear and absorb, what would that look like? Really excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's get right into it. Jenny, since I described you as the one who is living the life of doing more with less, what does it really mean on the ground? And where do you think most amount of stress today feels around it?
That's a good question. I think for myself as a founder, if I grew up maybe with the mentality of beggars can't be choosers, I think that's a very common cultural mentality. And so when I first started Hope House, I mean, everything was on my credit card, so I had to learn very quickly how to be resourceful. I didn't have funding, I didn't know how to operate a nonprofit. And with that, you get used to the hustle of doing more with less. I think there's a good side to it where it forces collaboration. It really helps you to look outside the box of how can I work with others, how can we partner together, how can we strengthen each other, which I think when things get pretty comfortable, we can probably get a little easy with that. But the stress of it is that maybe operating in a idea of lack, or that constant sense of, are we gonna make it, or are we gonna make payroll, takes a big toll on mental health, physical health, but also cultural health within the organization as well. Did I answer?
That sounds tough. And you made an interesting point there, like the stress of, are we even gonna make the payroll, which is real. And I think probably that's a segue to you, because you look at finances, you help with the planning. So do you think not-for-profits today, the board or the EDs, they are able to make decisions based on what they truly need versus all they have? Is there enough amount of financial clarity available to them?
So the short answer is no. I think when it comes to budgeting and financial reporting in the not-for-profit space, organizations are given a budget or a bucket of money, and they budget against that bucket of money, but they're not budgeting to what it actually costs to run the program. So budgets become, instead of a reflection of reality, it becomes aspirational. And it's really unfortunate, because when you present a budget that's somehow magically a balanced budget, the boards who see these budgets, or your donors or external parties, think this is great, you have enough resources to execute the program, but the financial statements don't show all the unpaid overtime or extra time people are putting in. It doesn't show the executive director, who now is not just the executive director, she's the CFO, she's IT, she's HR, and I say she because a large majority of people working in the nonprofit space are women. And this doesn't show up on a balance sheet or income statement. It's not reflected anywhere. And when it's not reflected, that story's not closed.
Here. Sorry.
No, we love that. With that, Angela, you have seen both for-profit and not-for-profit. If the same scenario was happening in a for-profit organization, I want to know that first. Then how do you think that organization would react? And is this something that would be considered that, yeah, this is a sustainable model, we just keep doing it? Because that's what has been happening with not-for-profit sector for a very long time.
Well, I'll tell you, it happens all the time in for-profit too, right? A founder will grow up their company, and sometimes they'll be reluctant to actually remove hats. Because they're worried about what that looks like to actually offload that. But what they can do is, because they're able to design their organization in such a way, whether they have a board or not, they can start to map out what they would need, right? And then they're not as, I think, pinned up against the financial constraints that the non-for-profit space or system is under, because what do they do if they need to go out and raise additional capital? They can go out and raise capital from all kinds of sources, from friends and family, from VC, from investment funds, or they can get more customers, right? So there's also the financial piece there. And we talk to our members all the time, and it seems so simple, but they still struggle with that. These founders and CEOs of for-profit companies, they struggle with how they pull those levers. And then it's a whole other order of magnitude, obviously, on the not-for-profit side. I think because of what you just mentioned, Kaya, because if you're not able to paper what is the actual crisis within your organization and document that, then it's never seen. You're just carrying the weight as the executive director, or even as a team member within the organization, because you know that the person maybe before you was carrying all of this, and that now becomes the expectation in the role, as opposed to designing out the organization for what it needs to be, not just today, but also tomorrow. So I think it's that pinch from both sides, right? You can't be clear about where it is you're trying to go to, because you're still trying to present yourself in kind of a competitive landscape, if we're honest, with other not-for-profits. And then you also are still trying to be fair to your organization for where you are today and how you balance that budget.
Interesting. So, with keeping up with that theme, 8% of Canada's GDP comes from non-profit sector. That is probably a general knowledge, but to your point of the competitive landscape and how do you raise fund, do you think nonprofits today do, I'm mindful when I say this, enough of advocacy in terms of
not advocacy in terms of that, hey, we need funding, but advocacy in terms of the amount of money they create. Meaning, if not-for-profits went out of business, they just closed their doors, what would be the impact on our system, on the government and the public sector, right? Do we do enough of advocacy around it so that we can tell the money we create so that we can ask for the money we need? And that's an open question to three of you.
No, we don't.
Okay.
For example, so we support vulnerable veterans and seniors, people who have experienced homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness. And one of my presentation slides shows, if more seniors end up in the hospital because they don't have our care, our intervention, we're looking at $1,600 per person per day. If you end up in long-term care, which if you read the news today, they just cut a bunch more funding to create more long-term care beds. But that's at $650 per person per day. Homelessness, $245 per person per day. Our service, $4 per person per day. Count the cost, because we're about to have a silver tsunami of seniors. If they already make up a quarter of the homeless population in our city, we are subsidizing the cost without government funding, fundraising to the private sector currently to subsidize healthcare, to subsidize where the gaps are between housing and health. And it hits really hard with seniors. It hits hard with most populations, but with seniors, especially with the housing and health kind of pointing to each other. But if that service is gone, well, the 900 seniors we support will be in the healthcare system. And when they tell me there's no funding, I'm like, well, it's great. You are paying for it though. You're just paying for it on the expensive end of it. You will pay for it. So I think we don't advocate enough about the cost savings. Problem is that how do you prove how many days you didn't spend in the hospital? How many years you didn't spend in long-term care because you were able to age at home? You can't prove something that you prevented, right? So it's really hard for the data. Study after study after study. So yeah, I think it's hard to advocate around the cost savings. And typically, I'll say, often women will downplay the hard work or the, we're not in it for the money. Most people who go into nonprofit aren't, that's not the drive. It's purpose driven, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't need the funding to back it up to do the purpose driven work. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't pay our team as well, and our staff for good work. For some reason, it's really looked down upon, which is unfortunate. Nobody questions how much a lawyer makes, But if I paid my staff, market rate, you'd get judged.
But so you mentioned what would happen to our society if all these services were to disappear. Our society wouldn't function.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these, for example, working with veterans, you're providing services to former government employees who have potentially a workplace injury, right? So why is the not-for-profit society or organizations taking care of something that government should take care of? And when the government provides funding to organizations, they're getting a discount for them because if you're underpaying people in the not-for-profit industry for they're not unionized, they're working for less than market because it's passion driven. Like, do we need to get paid on jobs to be fairly paid? Like, it's interesting the things that we will accept because people like their jobs and and that's kind of think that's right. Absolutely.
And I think it comes back to value, right? And it's so clear, right, in the for-profit world, math is genuinely accepted as the valuation structure for what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
But to your point, Betty, and what you're saying is, the impact, even when you put numbers towards it, there's an inherent discount, right, to the value that's provided, which is shocking to me, coming from the background that I've had. I just assumed naively that you can apply that same value structure, that same clear, like we're all businesses, we all have numbers, we're all working with the same sort of financial statements and structures. Can you not present that along with your impact report to demonstrate the value that you have? But there is this underpinning and underlying current within the not-for-profit sector that we have to do more with less. And so then governments expect to do more with less. And it's just an unfair power standard and power structure. I think to your point, I actually think the overall contribution to GDP is grossly misrepresented based on what I've seen in the not-for-profit sector. And I do think that part of that, it's just a question that I put out there, but I do think that it comes back to so many women are involved in this sector, and I think inherently women are less boastful. And so we do try to, share that we're doing this work, but we don't stand up and go, but if we didn't do this work, do you know all of this would crumble? And I think, I know there are people out there obviously doing that and obviously sharing those things, but I do think that we can stand even louder and prouder, and I want people to actually go out and shout from the rooftops what's happening constantly, because there's so much good work that happens that goes unnoticed and underrepresented.
Absolutely, and I think all three of you touched the nerve on that. There is so much that just because you're passionate about it, you don't need compensation for it, right? Unfortunately, the world doesn't work that way, and even the main passion that you have, the cause that you serve, it doesn't. So you touched the women bit, and I want to go deeper on that one. Women are socially, traditionally, and even biologically are sort of built and wired to take a little bit more pain than normal, or to stretch a little bit, to sacrifice. Not to say that the other gender doesn't, but if we look at last 1,000 years of history, I think this comment gets on. So when 70 to 80% of the workforce are women, many leadership positions are held by women, and we'll get to their compensation in a bit. We get it that we do not, probably unknowingly and unintentionally, we do not represent it as much as we should in terms of the problems. Where do you think the shift needs to happen? Is it an area where we can expect a shift from the external world, or is it an area where we need to rethink how we represent it in the first place? How much of it, the burden that we carry, how much of it is we are actually carrying? I hope that question is clear. I feel like that becomes a bit complicated as I went to explain.
Well, my question actually stems from, and I don't know if this is the right way to look at it, but a lot of nonprofits have boards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the board structure, a lot of these people who serve on boards, they serve not only on non-for-profit boards, but also on for-profit boards. And I think that good board governance should be to actually set up these companies to be structured in such a way that they're sustaining long beyond.
Mm-hmm.
And so my personal opinion is that I actually think that if good board governance was in place, then they would actually be the ones to start to go, hey, we are actually structuring this long term. We're short-shirting ourselves. We're actually setting our team and our organization up for failure if we are not compensating the ED fairly, if we're not setting up, what is our long-term strategy and having that actually map. What I see boards inherently placing more of the burden onto the ED to actually come up with that and to pull rabbits out of hats in order to be able to do that. And you don't see that same pressure in that same magnitude on the for-profit side. So I would put that a little bit forward to board governance and bringing that sort of over from the for-profit sector.
That is interesting. And any thoughts on why that is happening in not-for-profit sector, and maybe kind of seen quite a bit of it?
I've been, or I am a member of a board of directors, and so I've seen both sides. And I think oftentimes you're right. I think it really has to be a board governance-led objective. Like, you can't ask the executive director to do everything, and on top of their day job, now they have to advocate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who's gonna do that? Who has time for that? But unfortunately, you see boards where everyone on the organization is passion-driven to whatever objective the not-for-profit has, but no one has the financial expertise, expertise in strategy, management. So there's a vacuum of knowledge to take the organization to make those strategic decisions, to identify that there's pervasive problems. They're more just focused on, save the walruses or whatever, but for long-term sustainability of an entity, especially in today's economy, there really has to be purposeful, intentional, strategic plan.
Absolutely. Jenny, any real-life experiences around that?
I actually really agree with the board. I have a really amazing board, and I'm very grateful for them, and I'm so grateful for when they actually push me to say, Jenny, what will it take to compensate your team well so that, because they all come from a business background, to say, do you know how expensive it is to replace them? Like when you would find a good team member, how do we compensate them well? How do we have long-term sustainability with that? And it backs me up to do what I want to do. I agree. I think if boards have that mentality, going away from that like lack and always coming from a place of how can you save, for me, staff is number one. I'll find food programs. I'll partner with other things, but my team, if I can do well with my team, I think that prioritizing that is what's going to it's going to deliver the program. And even if we didn't have food, we'd still deliver the program. So that's the key piece. And I think board backing and board mentality, to have that same business structure versus charity is when I first started Holy House, I remember thinking, if I don't pay my staff well, I'm just creating more poor people, and then I'm going to need more Holy House. So that doesn't help. Like, I'm just creating more of the same problem. If my staff can't find housing, can't afford housing, then I'm just going to need more Holy Houses, and I'm not going to have the staff to run it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and while we're on the compensation topic, actually, Chiago from our team educated me a couple days back that in 2026 a study came out by Charity Village which talks about pay parity. It exists both in for-profit, not-for-profit. They did a study on not-for-profit itself, and even there, parity stats, it exists, women and men. Interestingly, as you go up to the executive level, it goes as high as 20%, which is extremely convoluted. We know it exists, but is there any deeper issue or any deeper motivation that we see why this happens? Because this is also a sector where we have majority of women represented as is. Kim is smiling, so I asked Kim. Give us one more laugh-worthy answer.
I'm just picturing all my male colleagues and wondering how much they make. 20% women. No, I don't know. I mean, it exists, right? It is out there.
I'll tell you why I think it exists. And again, I hazard to put this out there, but I do think that again, women in the sector will have a tendency to put their team before themselves. And so if you have the choice between where you're going to put your salary versus your team's salaries, you're going to bump the team up and you're going to keep yours at bay.
Okay, so I didn't take a raise for 6 years. I didn't think about it. I didn't ask my board. All I could focus on was, can I pay my team well enough to stay? And it is, and that's not like a brag. I didn't think of it. I didn't.
But it happens.
And my board was like, oh my gosh, how did we just go 6 years without getting a raise? And I was like, I don't know, but it doesn't, like, can we pay the staff?
But it happens across the board, right? And what happens is you don't realize like that's now devalued the organization.
Yeah.
Because you haven't been able to advocate for where the strategic direction is going to go. And you've basically taken that same shift that you were trying to make sure that your team wasn't there and put that onto you, right? And I do think that's why so many EDs or even folks in managerial roles, and that's not to say that I think everyone in a nonprofit struggles with that burden to some way or another, but I do see like a significant number of folks at the sort of top who are willing to kind of pull all these pieces together and pull all these pieces off their team in order to be able to, keep the company moving forward. But at the end of the day, if you are only a few months away from needing to pull the plug on yourself, that's not creating the long term for your company. And I've been there too, right? Like even just 6 months ago, I was kind of looking at where we were going and what we were doing, and I'm like, can I even do this? And I realized if that's the sort of mentality and lens that I have, even with my expertise on both sides, I'm really not setting up our organization for success, and I'm also shielding the board from the opportunity to find that out.
Yeah.
So I think I don't have a solution for that, but that's kind of what I see as a symptom, and it's, it's hard to put that out there, but I think it's so important that we talk about it so that people feel better about actually just putting their own hats in the ring, because you are doing the work, obviously.
And I was gonna say, like, having the executive director not take a pay increase for years and years is very common in the not-for-profit sector, but you never see that in the for-profit sector. The CFO always gets a raise, like it's the biggest raise. regardless of how the company's doing. So like, why does the NPO will accept that when companies who are about to go bankrupt still switch with bonuses? It's astonishing.
Shouldn't have thought there.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought. No, I was going to ask, and not to you don't have to answer, but how many of us think if somebody knew my salary, if it was too high, I would be embarrassed, or if they think because I work in a nonprofit, I should make less. And maybe that's part of that, like, imposter syndrome or whatever it is. I, for many years, felt that way. Like, I would never want someone to think I make too much money for a nonprofit job. And I feel like I don't know if men would have that same thought. I won't look at them. But I don't know. I don't know if that's like a nonprofit woman's brain, or if that's just women in general, or maybe it's just me. But I remember actively thinking like, oh, salaries are public when you work in a nonprofit.
Yes.
And what if somebody thought I make too much? What if my donors think I make too much money? And again, I wasn't like breaking in the dough. We lost funding, like all of it, and it's very real. That's a really, it's a really real thought. So.
And you touched something really good there. Is it a women thing? Is it a not-for-profit thing? Or is it a double whammy?
Maybe, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we traditionally think like that. We're in a sector, and that fear is very real. What if my donor thinks that I'm taking too much money and they will pull the donation? But isn't that too much of a cost to pay to serve the community and the people around us that we're so passionate about, and then we're worried that, God forbid.
But I think that's where some of the constraints come in as a not-for-profit, right? We're taught that, okay, you can only apportion this much to operations, but like, what is operations? And do you think actual for-profit businesses are holding themselves to those standards? I can tell you they're absolutely not.
Yeah.
There's so much bloat inside those businesses, and they're able to cover it up in so many different ways. And I think we are so much more litigious in some ways in not-for-profit because we feel we have we have donors coming in, we have different impact reports, there are standards that are put on this industry that I think, or this whole sector, quite frankly, that I think in certain areas, especially where there's so much work that needs to be done, how are you supposed to maintain these standards? It seems wild to me.
With 10% of your budget.
Yeah,
bonuses,
right?
Is
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, you must see it, right?
Because no one can do 10%
No.
administration
No.
at the allocations that all the funders require for some reason, and then the organization has to rely on unpaid labor,
Yes.
or they have to find other funding sources.
Yes.
Which
Or you
again,
just fudge the numbers.
that.
Right? We don't do that.
But it's untenable, right?
It's you're always trying to be creative with like, okay, is that part of program? It's very
Yes.
frustrating. Like, I just need to pay people to do
Yes.
this work, and then we
Yes.
can do the good work.
Yes.
It's a very frustrating. I think BC Housing went up to 15% now, but it is really, it's unrealistic. It's completely, it's absolutely unrealistic. Yeah. And I don't like feeling like a bad person to pay people well. It really bothers me.
When it's not even just around the paying people well, it's actually just like setting up your entity for success long term, right?
Yeah.
You think about the cost of housing and the cost of living and the amount of increases that go up based on that, and how are you supposed to map those? Even on the for-profit side, when you're looking at raises for salaries and increases like that, for-profit companies have a tough time, even especially in current economic standards, staying profitable and ensuring that their people are paid well too. However, they don't have to also align themselves to a certain operations or administrative threshold based on that, right? They can move that needle, but you can't in not-for-profit. And so I just don't understand how the sector is set up to actually support where it needs to go, which essentially creating this burden that is going to be lived and felt by the organization year after year. And I think if a lot of people who understood, what they're paying into, especially whether on the government side or even private donors, like looked at it through their own like financial lens, they would understand, or I would hope they would understand, that that's not the way to actually then create a sustainable future for that organization or that donation.
And the demands for administration escalate every year because now funders want to make sure you have sufficient insurance, sufficient like an IT policy, cybersecurity. Like all of this is administration, but funders don't want to fund it.
And it's the cost of doing business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we are seeing fiscal issues, we are seeing operational issues, we are seeing a lot of psychological and cultural issues too around it. If from the within you could change a thing, we talked about board governance, we need more advocacy, but from the within, if you could control one thing that you can have a significant impact in the direction of changing it, because this is something that has lasted for hundreds of years, what would that look like?
I mean, it's like, I guess it's maybe a controversial opinion, I don't know if it is, but I just think that nonprofits need to think and design themselves more like for-profits. And I actually think we need to just take that not-for-profit hat off and realize that in order to create a business that models on itself for the future, this is a for-profit business because you invest back in itself. And I would say that most nonprofits that I know of are some of the most fiscally responsible people, and they will look under every cushion for every possible way to make things happen. And so it seems to me like there's no reason why these mission-driven pieces that are clearly propping up a lot of the economic viability that we have, not just in this province, but in the country, why they would be constantly struggling. Like if that's the shift that needs to happen, I would just encourage like anyone who's working in not-for-profit to just take that non off and think about it that way so that you can set yourself up for the future. I think it's harder to do, or easy to say and harder to do, but I see that shift playing a big role.
And I think on the flip side of that, being held to the same standards, like having KPIs, having like prove that your model works, show the evidence that that this is valuable, and then people question it. Like I truly now have that relationship with my donors where I say, like, I'm investing this into staffing, I'm investing this into this, to show them what that gives, the value of that, in the same way a for-profit business would have those markers, and to be able to say, this is worthwhile, this is why we invest in this. I agree. I think that we can take that nonprofit mentality off. It would change it would shift our culture, as well as the outside, like the for-profit sector, our donors, our supporters, culture in general, to say, hey, how about if we didn't have coronavirus? How much less money would we spend? Replacing EDs, replacing frontline staff, having housing, having things like that. Being able to keep my directors because they don't have to move to Alberta because they want a yard for their children. That would be fantastic. I would really appreciate it. That's where it gets expensive. But in the moment, we're band-aiding these things to say, that we have to do more with less.
I think that there was a shift away from the scarcity mindset. So you mentioned like lots of organizations are really good at controlling their spending, but they're being very conservative with spending, but not being strategic with spending. So I think this mind shift was away from scarcity mindset to a more strategic mindset. So that could shift.
I'm just going to touch on that because I think that's a huge shift for us in nonprofit. When I started looking at in 2018, I did an interview with Business of Vancouver, and I was talking about KPIs, and I was talking about starting to treat Holy House like a business. And I shifted my mindset away from scarcity and lack to how much money and time could I save, even my own mental health. How can I, now that I have employees that I have to be responsible to, if I could, for example, we have a site in Victoria, and when I take the ferry and my car and I drive, it's like a 6-hour day. I lose 6 hours, but my job didn't get less. When I hop on Harbour Air, I pay more, but I just save it's 30 minutes. I'm in and out in like 35 minutes. I'm like, I just saved myself a whole day, and I can get in a full day of meetings. I can go visit our site. I can go do all these things. But my scarcity, nonprofit mentality, and I remember this is so small and simple, but like not posting it on Instagram to be like, oh, donors would think I'm wasting money. And I'm like, I just saved them so much money because now I have a full day of fundraising that I can do, and starting to shift my mentality into time is money, even for my staff. Like sending someone to the store instead of getting it delivered being like, no, their time's more valuable spent with a senior, helping somebody than switching out, like finding ways of saving them energy and allowing them to do their jobs really well. I'm like, spend it all day long. I'll go fundraise it, spend that money, because I genuinely believe it helps our mental health, it helps them not feel this pressure. Like, I had a meeting today with one of my site managers and I was like, you can spend that, replace that thing, it's making your job harder, buy a new one, absolutely. Like, protect your mental health, protect what you do. I'm very fiscally responsible, I'm very careful and very cognizant that people have entrusted their hard-earned money to support what we do, but I also understand that my staff need to do their jobs really well in order to make this program work. And it is moving away from a scarcity mentality, absolutely, yeah. But I think that, again, comes to leadership, to boards, to saying, so operate with enough. Yeah, what do you need? What do you need to do this really well?
Yeah, and I think for both changing the mindset from not-for-profit to think like a business and going away from scarcity mindset, it kind of goes against the grain. And I would love for you, Jenny, to tell us the story about the food cans that you told me when you and I chatted, that how that was an uncomfortable topic to bring on when you were talking about the donation is coming in canned foods, which is not enough to put a meal together.
Right. Well, I actually took the example from the Greater Vancouver Food Bank. I don't know if you remember, they kind of shifted years ago away from canned donations. And we kind of all grew up with this mentality of like, bring a can to this event. And finally they spoke out about it and they're like, it's really expensive for us to store all these cans, to organize them all. We're getting rotten things, we're getting random things. And people were like, offended and appalled, and they're like, we just need cash. Like, if you give us money, we have buying power, we can get nutritious food. Like, isn't that the point? We're trying to feed people. But so many people were offended by this. And I remember going to like event and people were like, I was like, oh, do you know that they've moved away from cans? And they're like, what? And again, beggars can't be choosers. And I'm like, well, what are you gonna do with a can of random beets? And like, how would you make a meal out of this for your family? And I took that as my example to say, when we need something, I need to be bold about sharing it, and we can communicate it really well, but it's the same idea where like, I would always have volunteers bring Tim Hortons and they bring like, 24 donuts. I'm like, how much money did you just spend on that? First of all, most of my clients have diabetes, so please stop bringing donuts. But also, I could have done so much with that money. We can do so much more as a nonprofit where we are creative, we are collaborative, we have this superpower of doing a lot with a little, but it's the idea that people want to give like what they want to give, or this practical thing. I can get anyone, like, no problem to get people to buy us a van or like things like that, but to give my staff a raise, try convincing a donor to say like, I need to give people more money. So I really appreciate when the food bank, I really like studied what they did. And they used social media, and they used communication, they did a really great job, but I was like, good for you, like, to just say it. And yeah, it ruffled some feathers at the beginning, and then now look at them go. Like, they're doing great. We have a huge partnership with them. When my seniors go to the food bank now, we drive them to the food bank every month. Unfortunately, it's our most popular program because people need food, and they're getting eggs and pasta and fresh produce and fruit. And I'm like, this is amazing. Like, they have real food rather than a can of chemicals, who knows what, right? So I think sometimes our culture, I think that's why we need a cultural shift. Stop being offended by cash. we just need cold hard cash. So we can do the work that we know what we know what to do.
It's what businesses ask for,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's the economic principle, right? And I think it's shifting, it's educating, right? Like what the Greater Vancouver Food Bank did was they educated people. They went, this is not working, this is not actually providing, this is not helping with our mission, right? And change that narrative. And that is hard to do if you are, maybe one smaller voice in an echo chamber, or you're operating within a sector that doesn't support that kind of thing. But I think, if more of us adopted that and were able to be, no, this is no longer cutting it, this is what we need to be able to do, then maybe that would shift. But we won't know if we don't try.
And I think you add the layer of a female voice. I find it harder. I don't know. I have the little voice in my head that don't sound rude or whatever you want to say. Words you want to use.
Be pleasant.
Be pleasant. Don't. I often find, especially in fundraising or in boardrooms, as long as I'm like the nice charity girl, they give me anything else. If I push back on something, all of a sudden I've shifted outside of that nice nonprofit role that I'm in. I need to be honest about this. And the push. I do find that I think there's an added layer there.
You see that shift happening in the
Yeah.
and that's a very unfortunate trap in a way of saying, like, you do need to argue and you need to ask for what you need, be bold, ruffle the feathers, and when you do that, you see the shift happen.
But I would argue that happens for women in the for-profit world
Yes,
too,
yes.
which is why I'm just happy to be loud and brash about it, no matter where. Because if you don't ask for what you want, you will not get it. That's just the reality of wherever you work, right? And I think it's easy to self-limit, and I still do it to some extent, but I've lived it where, like, if you do not ask, if you're not clear about what you want, you won't get it from anywhere. And yes, you may get those folks who immediately turn a blind eye or shift or, get uncomfortable, but maybe those weren't the people for you, or they weren't meant to be on this part of the journey with you, right? Like, you're definitely going to get no's wherever you are, whether in for-profit or not-for-profit business. And I think I would encourage people to be, to be clear, because oftentimes donors just don't know. They think they are helping you, right? Or different funding parties, they just haven't kept up with what is going on, and they need to know from you. They need to know what the impact is.
I think informing and educating of the impact is becoming more and more clear. Okay, I think there's some really good discussions, and I would love to give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions that may have.
I'm from the arts community. I run a hip hop theater boot camp for at-risk kids. We're 26 years old. We've been in the Lower Mainland and serving the province and Canada and Europe and the States for that many years. And we've reached a crisis in funding in the arts. But when you really pull it apart, and I think we don't have enough accountability, especially for our government funders, there's not enough transparency. And we're seeing government bureaucracy. Canada Council now has 500 staff members, and they're all paid over $100,000 a year each. And less money is going to artists in the arts community. And what we're seeing also is this, and we've seen this from one of the large foundations also in Vancouver, I won't name it, but they made some bad investments in 2021, 2022. They lost millions of dollars, and there's been zero accountability. And this is a community foundation. So while we're here like looking at ourselves in a fishbowl and trying to piece together why women especially are so undercut in our jobs and our organizations are struggling, we're not seeing accountability from politicians and government. And how do we do this? I talk to our arts lobbyists very frequently, and their staff, like the Alliance for Arts and Culture, which is right next door, used to have 8 full-time members. They have 2 now. So these organizations that are supposed to be our voices in legislatures and in parliament also have been whittled away. And where do we go? What do we do? And there's no accountability. We see more and more men getting funded. Again, there's a flip, and more focus on young men, especially. So what do we do? Where do we go next? We try to talk to the politicians, and because we're dealing with the Canada Council and the BC Arts Council, which are supposedly arm's length from government, they have zero accountability. So what do we do? Human rights cases, what do we do?
Are there private donors that are aware of this?
Yeah, but if you're running a small grassroots nonprofit arts organization, like our private sector is very small. And sure, my top donor, who's a real angel, he knows about it, but what can he do? He's an individual who did really well in the software industry and has kept us going over the years. We do talk to places like TELUS, Vancouver Community Foundation, who've been really good. But what can they do? They talk to the politicians, and it's getting worse and worse and worse.
I think on your first point, one thing that I think about is just how we vote. I think our government has gotten quite inflated, you're right? Government's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And it does take away from, it takes away from all sectors, not only nonprofits. I'm very we were just talking about voting. I was chatting over here. I think we also need to educate people on vote. Like, what does that mean? And how do you hold your government accountable to what they're doing with taxpayer dollars? And kind of the bigger and bigger government gets, the less and less services we see, right? So, yeah.
You can see it with the Canadian Food Program for the schools. I'm working with Strathcona Elementary. Those kids are always hungry. Like, they're starving.
Yeah.
I had to do a separate campaign to raise money to feed the youth in our dance classes and our theater classes over there, or else they're just climbing the walls. And these are at-risk kids to begin with, you know? But what we found out from people in food security, especially in East Vancouver, was that the money is coming from Ottawa, it's going to Victoria, and then all these bureaucrats are literally gobbling up this funding. And then there's no money left for the schools. So when we get into the schools, the kids are complaining about being hungry. I mean, I've never served so much pizza and sushi in my life, but they're fed. When they come to our classes, they're fed. But the rest of the school, they're not. We work with a school up in Prince George. There's one teacher there who runs a canteen. She runs around, you know, day and night in between teaching to get, you know, food for the school, because there's too many bureaucrats in Victoria. And too many highly, I mean, again, they're being paid over $100,000 a year, full benefits packages. You know, there's no accountability and there's nothing that can be done. We can talk and talk and talk. I'm sure we're trying to get, I mean, the arts vote, if you look at the arts vote, like in Toronto, for instance, Mayor Barbara Hall was voted in on the arts vote. So we know that we can mobilize communities like that. But it's just still, they get into those positions after all these promises.
Yeah.
And this is what happens.
My only encouragement on my end, we lost $421,000, like a third of our funding from the government with 11 days notice. And I will say there are people out there who care. Our donors stepped up and stepped in, and I find hope in that. I believe that people want to do good. Find your people, find your corner, and I know it sounds hopeless, but I think about how I vote. Are they financially responsible people? And also I find my people. I fill my corner, get people in my room who believe in what we do. And another thing that I often say, I'm a terrible fundraiser, is if you really care about, like, for example, I saw some people here from the downtown East Side Women's Center. If you're passionate about helping women, I'm like, please go help women, or women and children, women fleeing violence. I work with seniors. Do you want to support seniors? Do you want to support the arts? But I believe every person has generosity inside of them, and how do we use that? And then it's our role in the nonprofit to help educate people, to help people know about what we do, and then allow them to choose where they want to give and where they want to serve with their time. I would say time, treasure, talent, and that's what I try to focus on. Otherwise, I think it can get quite a feeling of hopelessness, and especially all of us in nonprofit. Protecting our mental health and keeping that positive perspective to say there are people who care, and how do I get them in my corner? How do I get them in the room? How do we have a room like this even, right? And
I'd love to ask each of the panel, like we just brought up mental health and in not-for-profit, but like the topic of this session with like burnout, and especially burnout in leadership and dealing with all of those multiple issues that we have to, and how do you deal with that? Or are you burnt out currently? Maybe that's a personal
I think
question.
I alluded to it. I was definitely burned out about 6 months ago. But I don't know, I feel like that goes through a cycle, right? This notion of burnout, I think it happens more than we really talk about, or than, and especially with women, because it's the whole, you can do it all mentality. I feel like I was personally really thrust into that in a very short period of time, because I moved from for-profit into non-for-profit while bringing my child into the world and losing my mom. And so it was like a whole worldview shift. And one of those pieces that I felt really strongly about was, understanding how do I set myself up for success, right? And what does that look like? And I think when you go through so many different paradigm shifts, and that's not just you as a person, but then also your organization, whether it's a not-for-profit or a for-profit, you're dealing with all kinds of external factors. And it's really about what is within your circle of influence? What is it within what can you control? And what it came down for me, and this is very simple, and it doesn't work all the time, but I live and die by my calendar. My calendar is sacred to me. If it's not in my calendar, it doesn't happen. I block everything into family time, work time, everything else, and it's non-negotiable. And I set it there, and yes, sometimes I bend that rule, but for me, it makes sure that I'm not, up at 1 a.m. trying to check emails and things like that, because that is my sleep time. And I know that sounds really simplistic, but for me and for someone who really values my own time as a working professional, but also as a family-oriented person, I think it's so important, because we can hold ourselves to standards where we're working around the clock, and if we don't set up ourselves for success, then we end up facing that burnout.
I think, so I work with clients during audits, and they seem to always be very burnt out during an audit. But I think the problem with mental health issues is that no one wants to talk about it, and it's invisible until it becomes a huge problem. And one thing I always encourage my clients when I speak directly to the boards of directors is to encourage them to ensure that their executive directors have help, whether it's making sure that they have access to mental health professionals, or having set up like a coaching or mentorship type program, because oftentimes executive directors are operating in a silo, and it's very lonely, I think, especially in the nonprofit space. So I think, as someone who is on a board, or if you're an executive director yourself, to ask if there's resources available. If they're not available, make sure they are available to you and your team members. Thank you.
I'm going to be very, very vulnerable. I was, lonely is the right word, for sure, especially when you have stakeholders and donors, and who do you talk to about, going through burnout. And I'd experienced a little bit of it during COVID when we were told it was 2 weeks, and then 2 years later I'm still delivering meals to seniors and trying not to kill them, and carrying that weight. I think most of us in nonprofit, we're very good in an emergency. Our cortisol goes up, all the things go up for that quick response, but then when you're asked to live in that crisis, everything shifts. Physically, everything shifted for me, mentally. But last year, so after the pandemic, Holy House was actually doing really, really well. It opened a lot of doors for us to be able to help seniors. There was more funding for us. And we noticed our staff weren't burning out. We had really healthy work culture. People loved coming to work. There's a lot of passion and purpose. And so we were given a grant to create a 5-module teaching session for others in the nonprofit sector of how to do this and how to create this positive work environment. And last year I was going around the province teaching it, feeling like the biggest liar, because I personally was burning out and suffering in silence, and it was such a lonely feeling. And it was a mix of personal and work and losing funding and all the things happening all at once. And I think the issue is not talking about it until it's almost too late, and then needing time off and needing to put that in place. So I do believe that there's one piece of like creating an atmosphere of, because we work in crisis, many of us work in constant crisis, understanding how to step out of the crisis, not living in crisis. We need those responses. We need the fight, freeze, but we can't live in it all the time, and that affects so many different things. So creating practices, like whether it's when I drive home and I put on music and I do this and I do that and I decompress, and then I'm like, before I walk in the house, I'm like, work's done now. But once I start answering emails at night, once I start, moving into my weekend time, my recreation, like if you look at the word recreation, it's actually recreate. You're meant to be recreating yourself. Taking that time, I take a full 24 hours where I don't look at my email, where I don't have work in my mind, where I'm recreating myself so I'm ready for work, so I show up best as I can for my team. And I think that's a really important practice to put in place. The calendar is so important. There's some great books out there about that. And I think there's also a rhythm that we set as an example for our teams. I work really hard on it to not sit there typing while I'm eating my salad at lunch, which is my big, I just want to power through. I want to power, but then I realize my staff are looking at me and I'm like, hi, how was your weekend? Let's eat our lunch together, because I want my team to be healthy, and I think I can just not follow the same rules and I'll be fine, which isn't true, which I learned very quickly last year. I have to follow the same rules as everybody else. I need to take a break. I need to go for a walk. I need to chit chat about the weekend. I need to go for a bike ride. I need to go for a walk. Like I need to do those things just as much as everybody else. And so I think there's a very real burnout because we work in also things that can seem hopeless, things that can be difficult. We carry a big mental weight, mental burden, whether you're saving walruses or working with people with disabilities or working with seniors or women. We're working in crisis, and in order to protect ourselves, to really step out of that, I think recreation is a big one, and protecting that time. One of the sessions I teach in that course is, we sometimes it's like a badge of honor to be busy. And when people ask you like, how are you doing? It's like, oh, it's been so crazy lately. Like I'm so busy. And what if we like shifted that narrative to be like, I'm really well rested. I went to the beach yesterday and then I got to bed by 9. It felt great. And just like, what if we shifted? We were so proud of how well we were taking care of ourselves, so that I can show up and be better for seniors, be better for my team. That's something that I'm really like working on now. It's like
That's very powerful.
I want to be the like when I hear people be like, oh, it's working till midnight, do that. I'm like, man, you're really bad at managing your time. but I want to put that on myself to say, stop it. Stop emailing at midnight. It's not sustainability.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for opening up with some vulnerabilities there. I appreciate it. I think we have time for one final question.
So my name is Bhavna Salaki, and I think since I was 20 years old, I've launched many businesses, and non-profit and for-profit sectors, led many teams. What I find is going into work culture and forming companies, we always talk about holistic platforms, right? I see this word overused in every business culture, corporations, whether it's profit or non-profit. The missing point is that there's no preventative measures, in burnout. So when we are setting up companies, I think it's really important. Like 7 years back, I took a company public and I was working like 17 hours, right? And I said, oh my God, what the heck am I doing here? I ended up getting sick and I was totally wrecked. I was hospitalized. And that's when I learned that, okay, if I'm in this state, how is my staff? What are they feeling? Am I going to lose them too? So right away, I changed the dynamics of the company by putting, bringing in people like, okay, you're going to cut off, we're all going out to go out for lunch, no phones during lunchtime. Evening we're going to have, before the office closes, we had a yoga session. So different things, because breath is so important, because when you're working, we don't even realize that we don't breathe. And that's why we have shoulder pains and back pains and, headaches. And we started bringing a massage therapist inside twice a week, So those little things, I think little steps, if we take in the beginning, that can help with the burnout in the business. I mean, it was a hard lesson for me. I suffered with the problem I had for 2 years, and it took me a lot of work internally, externally, to get back my balance, right? So it was a great learning for me. So I started launching programs for other corporations for mental health and self-care, and collaborated with one of the most amazing mental health worker who's got 2 PhDs from UBC. She wrote a book on self-care and brought her programs to hospitals and many other clinics. So that's something actually a non-profit or any company for profit should look into, having these programs to start right away. Even if it's once a week, right? Yeah, having the discipline, right? Is really important, and taking breaks.
Thank you for that. I did see one very excited hand going up there that I missed, so if it's okay with you, we'll take that one-time question.
Well, before asking the question, I would actually want to congratulate you for providing this platform, because I know many of us do talk amongst ourselves, constantly talking about the same issues, but having such a public platform really is helpful. We will go back with a couple of really good pointers, I think, shifting our scarcity mindset to a strategic one, and then the other one was take the non-profit out of the non-part of the non-profit and things like that. But what are the next steps? Like, are we thinking about maybe having something like this going forward? Regular sessions like this for non-profit meetings, because I don't know about others, but many of us talk about this, and just as women, there's the other. It's not just mental health, it's also the physical issues that come up when you reach a certain age. It's perimenopausal issues that come up, the foggy brain, the overworked, physical challenges sometimes that you face because you're constantly at your desk or you're constantly at work. So those kind of things, I was wondering if any of the panelists or even NPL are thinking about maybe taking this forward.
A lot of things happen in a more informal space than an informal space. And for example, I have here as a guest Angel C. So Angel is the Vice President of Finance Administration for UGM, and I come from a commercial background. And when I first became a senior finance leader for a not-for-profit organization, I knew nothing. And so I reached out informally to other senior women finance leaders in the not-for-profit space, and we formed a small informal circle where we support each other with mental health, with family issues, with stresses of finance funding. We talk about computer systems and we talk about AP automation. And so sometimes those informal circles, when you can find them, will become a longer lasting journey than when somebody organizes it. So to facilitate that, Ankle has for you some light refreshments, some wine, some beverages, and I encourage all of you to get to know each other, because there is so much value in this room. Each one of you, besides being a really informational session, thank you Jenny and Kyan and Angela and Kieran for this amazing panel discussion. I hope that all of you go out and take with you, because you are an advocate. I hope they have inspired you this afternoon to become advocates for yourself and for your organizations. Because in today's world, when we are nothing more than customer numbers, computer numbers, and usernames, you are the face of humanity. Your organizations and what you do in your community services, in your associations for healthcare, changes and gives value to each human life. So thank you for your commitment, thank you for your service, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. And for our panel, thank you so much.